Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar, How to Build KPIs that Showcase the Value of IT. My name is Kat Hughes, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to cover before we kick off this conversation. First up, you'll notice the GoToWebinar control panel appear in the upper right side of your main screen. You're muted by default to help minimize background noise, but this certainly does not mean that we don't want to hear from you. Your insight is an important piece of this webinar, so please send your comments through the questions pane. If you have any questions, submit them in the questions section of your control panel, and I'll be monitoring these throughout the webinar, and we'll take time for Q&A at the end. This webinar will be recorded. If you think someone else on your team would benefit from today's topic or need to hop off the call early, no worries. You'll receive a link to today's recording after the webinar. With that, I'm going to now hand it off to our speaker, Catherine Sorensen, for a quick introduction before diving into our topic today. Catherine?
Thank you, Kat. And just a full disclosure off the bat, both Kat and I are so fortunate to be a little under the weather today. So if either of us cough, apologies in advance. Thank you for your patience. But yeah, just as an introduction, my name is Catherine. I have been at GoTo for a couple years now. And the first year or so that I was here, I was focused on more market and customer and competitive research, understanding the different challenges and priorities that our buyers were having. So that's going to be very relevant to today, and it's one of the reasons why I'm very excited to talk about this topic today. And then in the last year, I've been focusing on our product rescue specifically. And that's another reason why I'm excited to talk about today, because product marketing, which purely, for those of you who don't know, it's like the side of marketing where you understand more in depth than most of the rest of like the marketing and sales organization how a product works from a technical perspective, but you're also responsible for understanding the audience itself that you're talking to, the people that you're helping, their different pain points, so that you can understand how to talk about it in a way that's maybe more compelling than an engineer who might be very smart but isn't necessarily the best at communicating that. And so I feel like today's topic is going to be in a lot of ways a product marketing lesson 101. So I'm excited to talk about it, but before we actually get into the subject at hand today, just want to give a little bit of a background on, let me go to the next slide. Okay, I want to give a little background on what Rescue is for those of you who don't know. So LogMeIn Rescue is GoTo's enterprise remote support product. So we have a few different remote support products in our portfolio. Rescue is the one that were tailor-made for really these larger organizations that are dealing with thousands of cases every day. So a lot of the things that we've built in Rescue are optimizing, every second counts when you're dealing especially with such a high caseload. So making it very easy for end users to get connected. We have like over 10 different connection methods. So it really works with whatever process your business already has in place. All of our like out of the box free integrations kind of help with that too, and making it very customizable, not only from that workflow perspective, but also from a branding perspective, and of course from a security perspective, getting very granular with the different access controls, all those things that are going to be a lot more important for larger organizations. So that's the background with Rescue. I have to get that out of the way before we get into the topics today. But part of the reason why I say that is a little bit of sales pitch, not really, but part of it is really just to say, when we're talking today, I'm going to give a lot of different anecdotes, and those anecdotes are, in my experience, I have a lot more personal examples talking to people who deal with the remote support, service desk, help desk side of things. So I've tried to kind of branch it out and put more examples that are a little bit more comprehensive of the broad range of IT, but I just want to get that out of the way, that that's the background that I'm coming from, and that's the area of IT that I'm the most familiar with. So without further ado, what are we talking about today? So today the topic was, or the subject of the presentation is building KPIs that matter, how to showcase the value of IT. So we're going to start off by talking a little bit about why are we even talking about this topic? Why is this something that we would build an entire webinar around? And not only that, but we do a flavor of this webinar every year or so, because it's a topic that is continuously asked for, and it's a problem that still exists, even though increasingly I think it shouldn't, but it's still something we need to be talking about. And then how to change that narrative. And specifically the topic of today's webinar is really building those KPIs, building that case to showcase the value of IT in the broader organization. And then we're going to give a few like practical tips to get started. I'm going to walk through, I want to call it like a case study of one example of a company that I think does a good job in doing this for other businesses, and then we'll take some questions. So feel free to enter in your questions at any time. We can get to them at the end, and the ones that we don't get to, we can also just follow up with email. But yeah, without further ado, let's dive in. I have some tea. Cool. All right, so this goes without saying. I'm pretty sure everyone here already knows this, but IT is obviously more critical than ever to business outcomes. A few stats that I found that I thought were pretty compelling. By 2026, 40% of revenue in the Forbes top 2,000 companies will be coming from digital products, services, and experiences. And I'm actually very curious to see if this is a stat that resonates with you or not. Unfortunately, I don't really know who I'm talking to. I'm talking to like my face right now. And as I mentioned before, a big part of my job was really talking to people and hearing their stories. So it makes me a little sad that I'm up here by myself and I can't see anyone that I'm talking to. So I encourage you to, I don't think we have a chat for this, but use the questions panel and just write in here while I'm talking, put in your feedback, put in what you think, put in your comments, questions, if there's anything that you can relate to, if there's anything that you think, oh, I don't relate to this at all, feel free to, I want to make this a little bit more interactive if possible. But this one statistic that I found when people are talking about IT budget, what's commonly used is it's not of profit, but it's of revenue itself. So around 7% of revenue for small and medium-sized businesses goes towards IT, and around 4% for mid-sized companies. And I would love to see if that's something that sounds right for your organization, or if that seems high, that seems low. But one thing I will say is that the research shows that year over year, IT budgets are constantly growing, even if some people feel like they're not, they are constantly growing. And that is in part because IT is becoming more clearly a value driver to businesses. They're becoming more business driven. And this is a chart that I stole from the Foundry State of the CIO report, because I think it gives a lot of really good examples of what businesses are doing to be seen more as these value drivers in organizations. One thing that I found very interesting here is you can see obviously these top two, automating processes, creating AI apps, that makes sense, right? The last three, making data more available, meeting more frequently with different stakeholders and the board of directors, and reporting on the value that IT provides, that's really not IT stuff like IT jobs. That's more soft skills, more marketing really. So that's going to be like a common thread of what we talk about today, is that a lot of what it takes for an IT department to go from being seen more as a cost center to being more a strategic partner isn't actually changing the jobs that IT is doing. It's really just changing the way that they talk about it and essentially the way that they market it in the organization. And so you see these stats and you're like, okay, great, we're going in a great direction. IT is one of the most important departments in a company. Everyone kind of sees that it's strategically essential to getting business done. It always gets the budget that it needs, and it's never the one that's getting scrutinized by finance. Amazing, right? Well, we surveyed people last year, and we found that that was not the case. Unfortunately, it's still around 57, which is over half of the people that we talk to feel like in their organization, it's seen as a cost center or seen just not getting the budget that they think that they need to get their projects done. And not only is that resulting in like burnout in an organization and like a reactive model for IT, you can't get as strategic, you can't get as proactive. Sometimes you can't implement the different security initiatives that you think are important. And not only is that like kind of forcing you to be in a survival mode, but sometimes it even means that you lose out compared to other companies that are able to be more proactive and more strategic in the way that they approach IT. And I think COVID was a great example of this, seeing the way that businesses that maybe treated IT as more of a value center versus a cost center reacted to when the pandemic happened. You could kind of immediately see like these are the ones that are going to be more appreciating IT, and they adjust much better when something so unprecedented gets thrown their way. But I'm gonna send out a poll in just a second over whether or not I want to get a feeling of if this 57% is changed at all, because this is about a year old. So stay tuned. We're gonna ask you guys in just a second. But before I do that, I want to talk about what I mean by profit center versus cost center, and another term that you might have heard a lot, which is force multiplier. So basically, one thing that I want to caveat before we talk about this is when we talk about IT as a cost center versus a profit center, there's slightly different definitions at play. One is just the pure accounting term, how it's treated in your organization from an accounting perspective, and often who IT ends up reporting to in the C-suite, which is another thing that we're going to ask you later on, because I love to take advantage of these webinars to do mini market research. So we're going to ask you that. But just because something is treated a certain way by accounting does not necessarily mean that that's how it's seen in the organization. So that's one thing that I want to just get out of the way from the beginning. When I'm asking these questions and when I'm talking about this, it's not literally how accounting views it, although usually there's a strong correlation between how accounting views it and how the organization views it. But we're talking more about how it's seen in the organization. Like, do you feel like you're getting that seat at the table? You're getting that priority when it comes to budget allocations. You're getting that same kind of respect and that same subject matter expertise when it comes to more strategic decisions in a business. So profit center, just to give dictionary or Wikipedia or whatever definitions, it generates both revenues and expenses. Usually they are held accountable for both revenue and profit ultimately, because it should exceed expenses. Whereas a cost center, on the other hand, is generates expenses and it doesn't have any responsibility towards generating revenue, but its goal is rather to just adhere to expense budgets and, when possible, reduce expenses as much as possible. Another term, this is not an accounting term, this is actually originally a military term, is force multiplier. And a force multiplier, the technical definition that I put here is a factor or combination of factors that gives personnel the ability to accomplish greater feats than without it, which is a whole lot of nothing. But essentially, in like when you think about it in IT, it's helping the rest of the business be exponentially more efficient, productive, scalable, sometimes even opening it up for them to create new revenue streams and lines of business, which is not something that necessarily IT is doing, but they're enabling the rest of the business to do it. So in non-IT terms, a force multiplier could be something like a hammer or like a drill, where it's letting you do a lot more than just a manual tool. But in IT terms, like, think about what a business could do if it didn't have a computer for like the most obvious example, or to get a little bit more realistic, like how much could a sales organization sell if they didn't have a CRM, or if they didn't have an automation tool in place for marketing or something like that. So that's kind of, those are some examples of IT as a force multiplier. When we talk about the conversation around how IT is seen, generally, I've seen some companies moving really aggressively towards being seen as a profit center. A lot of them are just focusing more on, let's be seen as a force multiplier. But what we don't want is to just be seen solely as a cost center. So where a profit center, you know, like a clear example of IT as a profit center would be like an MSP, right? They're generating profit for doing IT. So I see some businesses basically operate like an MSP internally. the cost center is where you'll hear things like IT is the plumbing of an organization. It's necessary, but it's not really adding anything. It's just something that needs to be done. And I think like maybe IT was the plumbing of the organization decades ago. Now IT does way more than that. And so what we want to move out of is that like antiquated view of it as purely a cost center. So before we go any further, let's shoot out a poll. I want to see how the state of it is today, how your organization is seen. So we'll give you guys a few minutes to vote. And then the one thing that I just want to clarify is we're not talking about specifically like how it's treated in accounting, but it's more when it comes to these deeper strategic conversations, when it comes to budget allocation, do you feel like IT does have that seat at the table? It does have that kind of understanding that it's helping to generate profit, or at least it's being a very like strong force multiplier, or do you still think that it's seen as a cost center? Oh wow, okay. These votes are coming in, and I mean it makes sense. I'll give it a little bit more. I'll give it a couple more seconds. It's not great that but okay, we can go ahead and close. Yeah. 63%. So that's worse than what I thought, which honestly, if you're attending a webinar that has this title, I guess it resonated with you somehow. I don't see the slides anymore. Okay, there we go. So, well, the good news is that means that today's topic will be relevant for you rather than not, but that's not great. It means that we have work to do as a industry. And this is one thing that I also want to caveat. I say here changing the narrative, and I talk about pitfalls of IT leaders. I know that it's not all IT's fault. I know that a lot of times it is a question of leadership, and it's a question of kind of a more antiquated view of an organization, and we can't just throw all of that on IT. But short of leaving the organization, you can only control really what IT does and what you guys are capable of doing and the change. So I'm focusing on the pitfalls of IT leaders, but I really want to make that clear that I don't think that this is all just IT's fault. And I will say the other thing that I kind of alluded to before, this is really a matter of soft skills. So a lot of times IT is very much already there. They're already where we want them to be, but it's just there's a lack of soft skills in the organization to conveying that value in a way that it's very obvious and hard to argue with. And that's why my job exists, because if all of our engineers did such a great job at communicating the value of the different releases and the different product developments, then they wouldn't need a product marketer to help create that message. So it really is a non-IT issue in a lot of ways. So I want to get that out of the way. There's a few things specifically. One of them we're not going to talk about as much today. I think this is a topic for a whole different webinar, honestly. But when you think about IT budget, that's a whole can of worms, because I've seen businesses treat IT budget very differently across businesses. In some projections that I've read have that in a few years, IT budget is mostly going to be owned by different departments. And then IT is kind of just in the center as like providing the service, and maybe they have the budget for their own strategic projects, but everything that like the budget, every IT thing that each line of business is responsible for, they own the budget for and they have to pay for. Whereas in other cases, IT is this big central budget and they were like, we know what goes into it, we want to own it all. There's pros and cons to both. Like I said, it's a topic for a whole other webinar, and it's really interesting to see how it's divided by size of the business as well. But in either case, if the different departments and if finance don't understand just how much what they are doing costs, obviously they're going to see IT as just using a bunch of expenses when it's really not their expenses, it's the expenses of the other departments. And you kind of don't think that. And so what you're used to is going to IT, asking for something and being told, no, you don't have the budget for it. And it kind of hurts the ability for IT to be seen as an enabler if they're constantly saying no. And that's one of the drawbacks of IT owning all of the budget. But like I said, we can talk about that more in another webinar or in the Q&A if you want. And in any case, regardless of whether IT owns the budget or not, they need to be doing a good job at communicating where the money is going and what different things cost, so that it's clear that they're not just like some black box that's eating all the money and not doing anything with it. But the other three, I think, are more what we're going to focus on today. One is not understanding stakeholder context. And what I mean by that is you need to really be able to translate what IT is doing in words that other departments are A, gonna understand, B, gonna like, it's gonna move them in a way, they're gonna care about it and they're gonna listen to it. So in order to do that, you first and foremost need to know what the other departments care about, and what, like, if you think about like a dog, for example, if you like seen those videos where someone's saying a bunch of words and they say the dog's favorite words, their ears like perk up. You need to know, like, what are those words to say that's going to make the other department's ears perk up and they're going to listen to you. And then be able to communicate it effectively, not only knowing what to say, but also actually making sure that you're doing it regularly in a way that they can't ignore you. Because I think a lot of times people are very modest and they like to deliver and then they don't brag about it enough, which is great from like a humility perspective, but it's not going to help when it comes to building your reputation in an organization. And then the last one, focusing solely on operational excellence. Yes, that's important. A lot of that is that plumbing aspect, where people see that as like the expectation and they don't see the broader implications of that. So while that is very much the conversation that should be having, that IT leaders should be having amongst themselves, because operational excellence is necessary for a functioning business, that's not necessarily the conversation that we should be bringing to other departments. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how to just build these KPIs when we're talking to another organization. And the main thing that I want to lead with is KPIs are going to be different. And I use KPIs very broadly as a term, but they're going to be different for everyone that you're talking to. Because like every single department speaks its own little language. So depending on who you're talking to, you're going to have to alter the way that you talk about things and what exactly you talk about. So like I mentioned, a lot of this isn't necessarily changing what the IT department's doing. It's just really learning how to better tailor your message and communicate it to other departments. And that's number one. When you talk about the different characteristics of good metrics, number one is it's addressing a defined audience. I've worked at a lot of companies where maybe they're like tech companies where the leaders are very smart, and I'm like, all right, who are we targeting with this product? And the response is everyone. And it's like, okay, well, if you're trying to send a message to everyone, you're going to be talking to no one, because there's nothing out there that's going to please everyone. You have to really be able to tailor what you say so that it's going to register with specific people. The second one is that it has a clear and specific relationship to a business outcome, and we're going to talk about that a little more too. 3, obviously measurable. And then 4, showing a change. So I'm not going to talk about these too much right now, because that's what the entire rest of the presentation is for. So let's just dive in. There we go. All right, so in marketing, we have this thing called user and buyer personas, which are basically these they're like usually like a piece of paper where you have like a stock photo of some random person that you call, like, I don't know, like Help Desk Harry, and you kind of make up some fake backstory for Help Desk Harry, like he's a father of 2 and he lives in Detroit and he whatever makes like X amount a year. And then you talk about like the different challenges and the pain points, what they like, their priorities, and you kind of socialize that internally to different product managers, engineers, marketers, salespeople. And the reason we do that is to really give a face when people are talking to a large group of people or when they're thinking about what to build, so that it's like, oh, I am thinking of a specific person when I'm building this, and I want to make sure that that person, that I'm not just thinking in my head, this is what I would want to see, but it's like, this is what they would want to see. The good news is you don't have to do that. A lot of research goes into building those, and you don't have to do all of that research because you don't have a vague persona like perception. You have real people in your organization that you already have a name and a face for. And I think one of the things that I don't see enough of is people really treating the different stakeholders in their organizations like personas. Because what we have with personas is you have it really just charted out. These are the different KPIs of this persona. These are the different challenges of this persona. This is what they do day to day. This is what they care about. And so whenever you're doing anything, you kind of have this to reference, and you can think like, okay, well, I'm writing this for our CEO persona. This is what they're going to care about. This is what I should keep in mind when I'm thinking about what to write. I'm not saying IT needs to do that for every single person in the organization. That would be a little creepy. But the reason I'm saying this is that that kind of deep understanding of who you're talking to is really what's going to make or break whether or not your message is heard. So at least touching some grass, talking to different people in your organization, talking to the different stakeholders that we like to call like decision makers in marketing, the people that really like can make those decisions, and making sure you at least know like, who are they, what do they care about, what are their challenges, how is their success measured, what are the different KPIs that they care about. And then there's also an element of when you're having these conversations, some education could be necessary as well. Like, do they realize the impact that their organization is having on IT and the impact that they have on your role as well. So it's hard to do all of this without actually talking to the people that you're going to be later reporting to or talking to. And the other big caveat that I want to get out of the way is I'm going to be providing some like practical examples throughout this, but these practical examples should be taken with a grain of salt. You can't be just like copying and pasting what I show here, because everyone is going to be different. Every organization is going to be different. Every CEO is going to be different. And you want to make sure that whatever you're saying is tailored to your specific organization. So here is a, oh, and the other thing is just you want to make sure that you know things like, do they care more about leading indicators versus lagging indicators? That's going to help you to build out these KPIs. So here's like an example of this made up CEO in my head, which, like I said, every CEO is going to be different. When it comes to things like employee satisfaction, there's going to be some CEOs that really care about that, and they're focusing on boosting ENPS scores or EX scores. And then there's going to be other CEOs that don't care about that nearly as much as they should, and they care more about just bottom line or ROI or spending efficiency. So in this fake example of a CEO that I've made up, these are their main priorities. I mean, I think the common thread that you can see in all of this is cost savings and reputation, productivity kind of thrown in there as like a loose connection to both of them, or really more to cost savings. But yeah, I think like in general, these are the things that you want to have right in front of you for the whole rest of the presentation, or for the whole rest of like whenever you're thinking about conveying the value of IT. You want to be able to say like, these are the 4 things. And if you have like monthly meetings where the CEO goes over company goals, that's a really great way to kind of get a sense of what they care about. You can kind of look at those and map that out. But you also should be talking to the highest ups. Like I think I read a really interesting study over, I think it was for CISO specifically, but it's like whether or not they get FaceTime with a board of directors is going to make a huge impact on how they're seen in the organization as providing value, and whether or not they get the budget that they need. So you really need to be talking to these people and getting an understanding of them specifically. But in general here, things that we see a lot, revenue growth, return on investment, profit margin, efficiency, retention and renewals, net promoter scores. These are a mix of leading and lagging indicators, which if you don't know, leading indicators are predicting a future outcome, and lagging indicators are showing the impact, which is usually like revenue focused. So a leading indicator could be something like, Rescue does, we have like customizable surveys at the end of every remote support session where you can ask the end user, like, were you satisfied? Or, you can customize questions however you want. And the results of that can kind of be a leading indicator for something like customer churn. So you should be looking at both. Every organization should be looking at both, but some CEOs are going to care more about one or the other. Some personas are going to care more about one or the other. So I actually want to do another flash bit of market research, and I'm going to correlate the responses from the first poll and the second. I can't do it on the fly, sadly, so this is just for my own knowledge, but I would love to know who IT reports to in your organization. And this is whatever your top IT person is. It could be a CIO, I'm not sure, some people don't have one, but we want to give that a second. For the people saying other, can you tell me who? Is it like a CTO, a CAO, a CDO? I've heard a lot of different options out there. Unfortunately, we were limited in the amount that we could put in this poll, but I'll give it another couple seconds. I'm getting in the Q&A, you say executive VP. That's executive VP of what exactly? Like IT as a function rolls up into what? Okay. Getting some interesting. All right, I think we can close it. Oh, we did close it. Perfect. Okay, cool. I don't know, are we showing these results or maybe not? Well, I don't remember if we're showing these, but I can just say it here. We're getting about a third to the CEO, and then 17 to the CFO, 13 to the COO, and then a third to other. And this is interesting. I read this really interesting paper that kind of showed how IT is likely to be viewed in an organization based on how the reporting structure works. So like they were saying, for example, if it reports to the CEO, you're more likely to be seen as an enabler. Whereas if it reports to the COO, you're more likely to be seen as an asset, CFO seen as a cost center, and like the different strategies that are likely to be seen. But here we're seeing a lot reporting to the CEO, and I'm gonna do some digging in the data later to see like the correlation between cost center and who they report to. But this is good to know. This is good to know. Moral of the story though, whoever you're reporting to, you want to make sure that you definitely know their full title, you definitely know who their boss is, and you definitely know what metrics they're looking at, what's giving them a headache every day. All right. Oh, I already skipped ahead. Okay, perfect. So number two, a clear and specific relationship to a business outcome. So this is something that I see a lot. There are KPIs that there's KPIs that a lot of different IT organizations track religiously, and they're very useful to IT organizations, but they're going to sound like gibberish to your CEO or whoever you're talking to if you don't connect the dots or do that extra little jump to kind of translate it to something that they care about. So like stuff like ticket volume, it's not hard to make the jump to tie ticket volume to productivity and to tie that to like increased time that employees get back to focus on other things. That's not that hard to do, but you have to do it, or else if you just go with like ticket volume, or if you're customer support, if you just go with like first call resolution, same day resolution rate, those are all very valuable, and it's clear to see why they're valuable, but you're going to have to do a little bit of extra legwork. And I think there is, especially if you haven't built in a more like predictive model, when you lead with stuff that are these leading indicators, you're going to have to do that math to tie them to a lagging indicator, especially in the beginning, just to show that connection, so that the impact of these changes that might change leading indicators is going to have a more clear correlation to the KPIs that whatever your persona is going to care about. So I think if you're starting from scratch on this, and let's say you don't have a lot of clear regular reporting with management or with leadership and exec in place, and you're kind of thinking, how do I build this case for me? I'm going to pretend you're starting from absolute scratch. Take a step back, list out all of the different roles and all the different tasks that your IT department does. Everything, like even just buying computers, having computers. And then think about what your business would do without them. Because there's a lot of things where it's like, well, really think about it. Like if your business didn't have internet, like how would you run? Which, you know, is the standard today. So it's not necessarily something that would really like give shock value, but you have to take that step back and really understand the whole impact. That way you can come at it with a fuller message. So I have a few examples of questions just to kind of get your mind jogged, if that's a thing. Questions to ask yourself. One easy thing to look at is COVID. How did we adjust during COVID? And these can be good examples or bad examples. Honestly, if a lot of the historical examples in your business are bad, that gives you a great case to show the positive impact and positive change. So if your baseline's not good, don't worry about it. Like we can go from there, especially in changing a narrative. So how did your business evolve during or post-COVID? You know, did you all of a sudden have to facilitate remote work for like hundreds of people, and now you still have to do that? In what ways has IT made the business run more efficiently and more securely? These are ways that maybe you haven't talked about that broadly with the rest of the organization, but they're projects that you've implemented for your own team, and they have those compounding effects on the rest of the company. They maybe just haven't mapped out and made very obvious to the rest of the company yet. What software applications does your business use? All of your business, not just IT. And then what would operations look like without them? You know, like if you're HR and finance, if they use like payroll systems, payment systems, and accounting systems that are all reliant on IT, would you be able to meet that compliance if you didn't have them? What would your company look like without that existing IT infrastructure? And I know that every business is different in the way that IT kind of handles things. And, you know, I could be talking to some people in the audience today that are maybe at a larger company and they're like, I don't deal with any of that. I just deal with this one very specific thing. So you're going to have to take that into account, obviously. But thinking about all of the different things that your specific organization touches, have they ever had incidents? This is a good one. Have they ever had incidents where things broke, where things went down? And I know that everyone loves to blame IT when things break, but like that's when things break. All of the rest of the time, things are working and you're relying on those things, and IT is responsible for that. So looking at times when that gets taken away kind of helps you understand like this is how much you need us and how much we're actually delivering to you on day to day. Another one that I like to do as like a marketer is comparing yourself to your competitors. You know, have your competitors had any like big security breaches? Any of that? Like security is one of the tough ones where since it's so risk-based, it's almost like insurance. It's hard to show an ROI, but that doesn't mean it's not important. It's very important. So I think looking at examples of your peers and other competitors, if they've had any kind of run-ins with security, that's absolutely something that you should look at, and you can kind of make that case to be like, this is something that we've done differently than them, and this is how we're doing, and this is how they're doing. So moving on, we want to make sure, obviously, that they're measurable. This is something that I have worked very hard at in my job specifically. I think there's a lot of data that I want things to be data driven as much as possible. And like I mentioned, in the last year, I moved from being like collecting insights and research being my full-time job to being more of a product marketer for Rescue. And one of the things that I tried really hard to retain was making sure that I was still getting that like steady heartbeat of hearing feedback from customers and getting that data from customers. So setting up those processes, one of the things that I realized was there's a lot of data that's being collected. We just don't have an easy way of looking at it and analyzing it. So one of the things that you want to be looking at is all of these different jobs that you've just mapped out, let's say on a piece of paper, but more realistically on like a Word doc or something. Do we have a way of tracking the impact of these? Maybe it lives with another department. Maybe you have to go talk to another department and get the data from another department. Maybe you have to do a little bit more of an informal poll, like reach out to your HR department and be like, hey, on average, how long does it take for you when it comes to onboarding a new employee? What do you have to do? Or reach out to your IT team. Hey, if you don't have that like analytics in place to be like, this is how long X ticket takes, you can also do something that's a little bit more like napkin math. That's fine too. Your goal really in all of this is to be able to measure and communicate in actual numbers where IT has let you do more with less, or where it's really done any of those things that we mapped out with the CEO. And I will tell you, management, leadership, exec, they love numbers, like love numbers. So any way that you can tie anything to a number is going to help you exponentially when it comes to building this case. And not only does it help make it easier for you to show the impact of your department, it also helps you be more strategic. You know, like if you don't have a ticketing tool in place and you're getting all these requests from people via like Slack or Teams or something, there's no way for you to look back and be like, oh, hey, 90% of people that are reaching out for help are asking about this one specific thing. Maybe we should build like a FAQ that answers this one question and kind of make something a little bit more self-service. Like it's really hard for you to get strategic if you don't have that data. And that's personally why I've pushed so hard for like collecting data in my organization. But I know that it can be hard. I know that it can be hard to not only get the data, but then find a way to easily analyze it and have it available. But just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth doing. And sometimes it's really, not sometimes, a lot of the times, that's really going to be the key for building a case or not building a case. You have to have numbers to really prove your point, or else you're just relying on anecdotes, which can work, but only to a certain extent. And we can talk about different ways to kind of collect those numbers if you don't have them easily, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. These are just a few examples. Like I said, take these with like a grain of salt. It's going to be different from every organization. These are a few things that I've heard thrown around in the conversations that I've had. But knowing the age of your computers and the number of devices out there, all different areas of spend. You know, a lot of people don't know how much they're spending on SaaS licenses. They don't even know how much they're spending on things like printer ink or the amount of printer jobs. I heard from this one company that one of the first things they did was implement a tool for printer management so that they could even just see like how many times are people using printers and what are they using them for, and then from there you can kind of work on optimizing. But you can't work from nothing if you don't have any data to go off of. The number of tickets that you're getting in the cause, like what are people writing into a help desk about? How long does it take on average to do certain tasks? When it comes to support requests, I heard from one organization that they had their facilities team start using a ticketing tool. So it wasn't even IT that was using it. They got another team to start using a ticketing tool, and then they could look at the different jobs that the IT that organization was doing, and then they could optimize from there and see like where can we add in automation. So I think a lot about it for internal IT because those are the people that I talk to a lot, because Rescue is a tool for not only internal IT, also customer support, but we talk to a lot of people in internal IT, but it doesn't only have to be internal IT. Like there's a lot of different ways that an IT department will help give that analytics, especially predictive analytics, but help give that data to other departments. And other departments love data. Everyone loves data. So any ways that IT can collect data and share it with other people, they're going to be seen as this like guru, subject matter expert source of wisdom that they can go to for everything. That's huge. I cannot emphasize how huge that is, even if you're not showing a huge difference. If you even are just becoming that beacon that people go to for insights, obviously like you can have a data analytics department. You don't have to do all of the analysis yourself, but collecting that data. License utilization of the licenses we have, who's actually logging onto them, who's using them, what's our estimated downtime? And that can be not only like official downtime of like servers and stuff, but also like, you know, if somebody I was thinking about this a lot when we recently released a integration with Intel vPro, which meant that with Rescue, you could now troubleshoot, you can now remotely support computers that are out of band. So like, let's say like blue screen of death, or like they're encrypted with BitLocker. You're now able to, with that, it's like a native integration where you're now able to connect to that computer at the BIOS level and decrypt it. And I had an issue where my computer had to be, it had an issue at like the BIOS level, it was encrypted. I had to ship it back and I never saw it again. So like those little things, that was like a week of downtime that like would have been resolved if someone had had a tool to be able to remotely get into my computer and troubleshoot it there. Also stuff like ENPS, CSAT, you might not be collecting that, you might be collecting that, especially if you have like a ticketing tool or a tool like Rescue where you can put those surveys at the end. That helps give data that's not only useful for you, it's useful for the rest of the organization. And things like obviously like email viruses, spam blocked, server space usage. These are just a couple. There's so many other things that we could look at. The last one is showing a change. So when you do make a positive impact, you want to make sure that you're bragging about that. You want to make sure that you're talking about it. I think one thing I see a lot is people working on these projects and then like setting it and forgetting it. Maybe it's a project for another organization. Check back in, see how these metrics that you've now started collecting are changing, and then take credit for it. Like if you're not, I mean, I've done this myself too. I do all this work to like make a change and then I don't really track the impact of it. But if you're not tracking the impact for it, you're not getting the credit where credit is due. And that's credit that you should absolutely be taking into different meetings. Make sure you're having meetings. Make sure you're regularly getting in front of whatever exec or leadership team you're reporting to, and you're showing this is what we did in the last quarter. This is the impact that we had. Maybe that could look different for everyone. Maybe it's a PowerPoint. Maybe it's like an async doc that you share around. Maybe it's a monthly email. I don't know, but just make sure that there is a easily digestible way that you're sharing the impact and that you're doing that math to connect it to the KPIs that we talked about earlier with like the persona that you're talking to. And then if you can forecast, if you can project, that's even better, because then you kind of are seen as that expert and you can kind of give that predictive analytics. So I have a few examples here of what that looks like where you've kind of done the math there. So these are just a few different projects that you can that an IT department would do, and these are ways that you can talk about them with a CEO. So like just a few to call out, like let's say you invested in a software license management tool, which, fun fact, did you know that an estimated 1/4 of a company's SaaS accounts have not been used in the last 30 days? Just something to think about. But you invested in this tool, you found out, hey, half of these licenses weren't being used. Bam, we cut our SaaS license spend in half. You know how much money you can now like claim credit for like having saved the company? Upgrading devices, you know, you can take in some industry stats here, like difference in speed of processes for a device that's 2 years old versus 4 years old. So showing the like projected impact in dollar amounts. And like I said, napkin math, bringing in industry stats, that can all, you can use all of that to kind of help make those projections. Visual engagement tool, like we have this thing called Live Lens, where it's basically a zero download tool on your phone that you point to different, like let's say you're troubleshooting a printer, and Rescue is a remote support tool, right? You use it to remote in and see what's going on in the computer and troubleshoot from there. But let's say that's offline, or let's say it's not a computer that you're trying to troubleshoot. This helps you just click a link, you pull it up on your phone, you can point the camera to whatever you're trying to troubleshoot, and the agent can see there. And we've seen that not only in IT, but also in different like customer support, no fault found returns, like appraisals for different estimates and stuff like that. You know, you can kind of save all of those on-site travel costs. We had one customer save, it was something like tens of thousands a year because they didn't have to travel on-site and troubleshoot, I think it was motorcycles. And that's something that like, if you can translate that into a revenue amount, that's huge. Here's, yeah, I had a few examples written out here. You can also, depending on obviously what your CEO wants to hear, you can talk about like, oh, hey, we boosted CSAT by this amount. We saved agents X amount per case by investing in this integration, which is valued at whatever, like a year. And and employee satisfaction. This is all not real numbers, obviously, but we had like, you insert your own numbers. We had some customers that we've worked with where we get real numbers. Like we had one, they're like a payments, like a payment, they do the payments on POS systems, unlike retail, and they saved around 8 to 12,000 hours per year on downtime because they implemented unattended access. So they didn't have to like go and bother someone in the middle of the workday and be like, okay, we're going to remote in here. They could wait until it was offline. So all of those little things that you can just do that extra math and translate it into these numbers, that's going to be huge. And you want to make sure that you're taking on that responsibility and doing that. If you don't have a team in place to do that for you, which odds are you don't. Another example that I want to call out, we had one customer using, I think it was still Live Lens, but maybe it was another one, that using this tool allowed them to open up a professional services line. And you know, they were like a retail, I think like camera selling, huge multinational, and it's now they can open up a whole new line of business, and you can claim credit for like all of the revenue generated by that, not directly, but you can still absolutely bring that to the table and say like, hey, all of this revenue that's been brought up by the professional service business, which historically professional service businesses have very low expenses, right? Because they're billed directly. That's something that IT has a huge hold in what we were able to provide here. Another example is like if you invest in something that helps you meet a certain compliance requirement that maybe you're not required to have, but certain customers need. Like I know Resolve, which was another one of our, it's our like more SMB focus. I was talking to a customer and she was like, you're one of the only tools that is certified by this like tool that we have to use for banks. So the person, I don't know if we did that on purpose, that was a nice surprise, but if you are like, hey, we implemented this, which now means that we're certified to be used by banks, you've opened up the total addressable market of who your company can target by X million or whatever. You can take credit for that. That's something that IT is responsible for having opened up. So yeah, I'm not going to dive too much into this more for the interest of time, but feel free to pick apart later. The last thing I want to talk about is the TEI report. So this is something that we worked on with Forrester about a year ago. And Forrester is this company that does these TEI reports. They help companies demonstrate, justify, and realize the tangible value of IT initiatives to both senior management and other key business stakeholders. So the reason I want to call this out is because this company for a living is looking at the different investments of IT and translating the benefit in terms that key leadership is going to care about. So they look at things like benefits, which is all of the different value delivered to the product, all of the different expenses necessary to deliver that value, and that's like initial and ongoing. The flexibility, which is like the value that you can get for further projects building off of that one. Risks, which is stuff like, you know, if you factored in training costs, factoring into account like the churn, and you're gonna have to retrain and stuff like that. So they do this through a mix of interviews and surveys for different users of the product, and then they put together this big report. I think we're gonna send it out to you later, and I can't dive into it too much right now, but it really gets into the math, and I think it's very interesting to look at how they go about doing these calculations, because the numbers that they pull are numbers that, I'm gonna go to the next slide, objectively are numbers that a CEO would care about. So like these are just a few things that they were able to calculate. They were able to calculate that the ROI of Rescue over 3 years is 395%. I've done this, we've used them at a few companies. I've never seen an ROI that high. That's crazy, but you can dive in and see like, why is it so high? They were able to see that the total benefits over 3 years was 2.61 million. And this is for a composite organization that they've, like fake organization that they built. They kind of dive into all of the specifics. And then the net present value, and they've kind of mapped out the 4 different areas where it provides value: end user efficiency, help desk productivity, site visit costs, customer support, and the different value that that's going to deliver over 3 years. So just to give a few examples, like giving 45 minutes back, just this is to show kind of how they made those equations. And the report itself really goes into the math, and I really suggest you check it out, not because I'm bragging about Rescue here, although I'm happy to brag about Rescue, but I found it very intriguing and inspiring how they were able to draw these calculations and bring these numbers, which then you can very easily take to leadership, because that's the audience that they're used to talking to. So they kind of pull in a mix of quotes and stats. And a lot of this they do via surveys. So don't be afraid to just survey, like ask your IT managers, how long does this take? Downtime decreased 50% for laptop and desktop tickets, 25% for mobile. It took around 50% less to resolve IT tickets, and they were able to calculate that that's 14,000 hours over 3 years. And then 21 to 28% higher CX scores, which I have another like resource later for kind of finding the dollar amount of that. They were able to have 15% less field calls, and those field calls that they did have were 45% cheaper and 30% shorter. And then these quotes, like, they do help provide some color as well, anecdotally. So, you know, if you don't have this data internally, feel free to use third-party research. The only thing I'll say is, if you are trying to find statistics from a third party, try to make sure that they align as well as possible with your industry and with your size and your location. But just a few that I like to use. The IBM's cost of a data breach report has so many interesting nuggets to dig in on security, which can be a historically very challenging one. Downtime, $400,000 an hour is the cost of unplanned downtime for a large enterprise. Obviously, if you're not a large enterprise, you'll want to find more specific stats to you. But just to give a couple other examples that I think are very helpful. This shows, and you probably can't see it here, but this is from the IBM cost of a data breach report. It shows in general of companies that are breached. This is what all of the different security investments that they have added or detracted in how expensive that breach was. And you can use that data when you're trying to invest in different security initiatives. And that's something that you absolutely can lean on, but that's not something that you could find internally. And then this other one is, this is in the TEI report that I think we're going to send out later. These different 1% index change in customer experience ends up having this different revenue amount for a business. So these are just a few. You can find third-party resources to kind of help. But then to end off, I just want to say, like, these are a few questions you want to make sure you're asking yourself regularly. Do I know these priorities? Are my initiatives tying to them? Am I tracking these relevant metrics? If I'm not, how can I get them? And then am I looking back on projects once they've been launched and making sure that I'm tracking their success? And if they're not succeeding, how can I iterate and how can I pivot? So we're at time. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, and I'm sorry about that. I'm going to end with this last poll, just in case any of the things that I've mentioned about rescue are interesting. We can, I don't know if we're...
If you could have everyone just answer into the Q&A pane, because we do not have a third poll, that would be very helpful to answer this. Okay. That's okay.
Well, feel free to drop it in the Q&A pane if you're interested in someone following up with more information on rescue. But yeah, sorry, unfortunately, I don't have time for questions. I want to be respectful of y'all's time, but I will follow up on email for the questions that have been asked. And I'll hand it over to you, Kat, to finish. I did not expect to talk so much, but I guess that's on me because I know myself.
You did a great job. I want to thank you so much, Catherine, for speaking to us today, and for all of you who joined this session. The recording of this webinar will be shared out in the next 48 hours, in addition to some other helpful resources. So have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.